Welcome to Storytales. Please like this video and subscribe to Storytales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. The steady beep of monitors filled room 314 like a mechanical heartbeat. Nolan Reese sat in the plastic chair beside his son's bed, his calloused hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee. 10-year-old Jesse lay propped against white pillows, his face pale, but his eyes bright as he flipped through a guitar magazine. "Dad, look at this one." Jesse pointed to a vintage Fender Stratocaster. Eric Clapton played one just like it. Nolan leaned forward, studying the picture. Sunburst finish. Classic. "Maybe when you get out of here, we'll find you one to learn on." "Really?" Jesse's face lit up despite the 4-tube taped to his thin arm. "Really?" Nolan ruffled his son's hair. 6 months of autoimmune disease had stolen Jesse's weight and color, but not his spirit. The doctors called it aggressive. Nolan called a fight they'd win together. The door opened. Delaney walked in carrying a paper bag from the cafeteria, her blonde hair perfect despite spending the day at work. She kissed Jesse's forehead, then glanced at Nolan. "How was he today?" "Good. We talked about guitars." Nolan stood, stretching muscles tight from 12-hour welding shifts. "I need to head back to the job site. Murphy's crew is behind on the hospital expansion." Again, Delaney's voice carried that edge he'd grown used to. "You were just there this morning. Double shifts pay for this." Nolan gestured around the room. "Insurance only covers so much." Jesse looked between his parents. "It's okay, Dad. Mom can stay with me." Nolan kissed his son's head. "I'll be back tonight. We'll listen to some Hendrix." "Promise?" "Promise." Walking down the corridor, Nolan passed nurses he'd learned to recognize, orderlies who nodded in greeting. Room 314 had become his second home. The smell of disinfectant no longer bothered him. The sounds of suffering from other rooms barely registered. His world had shrunk to Jesse's fight and the work that funded it. Outside, Spokane's October air bit through his jacket. He climbed into his pickup, started the engine, and drove toward the construction site, where steel waited to be shaped into something permanent. 3 days later, Nolan returned to the hospital after a 14-hour shift. His shoulders ached and his hands were stained with grease, but Jesse had texted about feeling better. That was worth any amount of exhaustion. The elevator climbed to the 3rd floor. Nolan walked the familiar path toward room 314, already planning tomorrow's visit to the music store Jesse had mentioned. Maybe they could pick out an acoustic guitar, something gentle for small hands to learn on 50 feet from Jesse's room. He heard voices. Delaney's voice and her mother's. Cynthia Ryland was visiting again. The woman had been hovering around Jesse's bedside more than usual lately, always with suggestions about treatments and medications. Nolan slowed his steps. Something in their tone made his military training kick in. 2 tours in Afghanistan had taught him to recognize when conversations weren't meant to be overheard. "It'll be over soon." Cynthia's whisper carried just far enough that Delaney's quiet laugh chilled him. "As long as no one finds out." Nolan stopped breathing. His hand moved automatically to his phone, finger finding the record button. The conversation continued in hushed tones he couldn't make out, but those words replayed in his head like a broken record. "It'll be over soon, as long as no one finds out." Find out what? What would be over soon? The voices stopped. Nolan heard movement inside the room. He walked quickly to the nurse's station, pretending to check something with Tina Holloway, the night nurse who always asked about Jesse with genuine concern. "How's our boy doing tonight?" Tina asked. "Seemed better when I left this morning." Nolan kept his voice steady while his mind raced. "His appetite's been improving. That's good to hear. Sometimes these cases." She trailed off, then shook her head. "Well, you know how it is." "Yeah, I know." But he didn't know. Not anymore. Those 6 words had shattered something fundamental. Nolan Reese had learned to trust his instincts in combat zones where the wrong assumption could get you killed. His instincts were screaming now. When he finally entered Jesse's room, Delaney was alone, scrolling through her phone. She looked up with a smile that suddenly seemed different. "Hey, you're early." Finished the pour ahead of schedule. Nolan kissed Jesse, who was sleeping peacefully. "Where's your mother?" "She just left. She brought Jesse some cookies from that bakery downtown." Nolan nodded, studying his wife's face. Delaney had always been good at hiding things. It was one of the things that had attracted him when they'd met 8 years ago. Now it felt like a warning sign he'd ignored. "I'm going to stay the night," he said. "You need sleep, Nolan. The couch here isn't good for your back." "I'll manage." Delaney gathered her purse. "Suit yourself. I'll be back in the morning." After she left, Nolan sat in the plastic chair and watched his son sleep. Jesse's breathing was steady, his color better than it had been in weeks. But those words kept echoing that it'll be over soon. Over. What did that mean? Jesse's illness? His treatment? Or something else entirely? Nolan pulled out his phone and played back the recording. The quality was poor, but clear enough. He saved it to 3 different locations and uploaded it to a cloud account he'd set up for work photos. Trust, he'd learned in the Army, was a luxury soldiers couldn't afford. Tonight, he'd learned it was a luxury fathers couldn't afford either. The next morning, Nolan drove home in silence. The recording played in his head on repeat while he tried to make sense of what he'd heard. Maybe he was overreacting. Maybe stress and exhaustion were making him paranoid. But 20 years of military and construction work had taught him that gut feelings usually meant something. Take the tea home. He showered and changed clothes, then sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee and his laptop. If something was wrong, he needed to know what. And if someone was threatening Jesse, he needed proof. The decision felt like crossing a line he'd never imagined crossing. But Jesse's life might depend on it. Nolan drove to an electronics store across town and paid cash for 3 small recording devices. The salesman explained how they worked, how to hide them, how to retrieve the audio files. Nolan listened like he was receiving mission briefings. Back home, he installed one device behind the kitchen counter where Delaney often took phone calls. Another one in their bedroom, hidden inside an old radio he never used. The third he kept for mobile situations. Then he waited 0.2 days later. While Jesse napped at the hospital, Nolan listened to the first recordings. Most of it was routine Delaney talking to her sister about work, calling in a prescription refill, ordering takeout for dinner. But on the second day's recording, he found something that made his blood turn cold. "Rhett, I can't keep doing this." Delaney's voice was clearer than the hospital recording. "It's getting harder to pretend." A man's voice responded. Nolan recognized it immediately. Rhett Carson, their family friend. Jesse's youth baseball coach from before he got sick. A man Nolan had trusted with his son. "We just need to be patient a little longer," Rhett said. "Once this is all settled, we can be together. I hate going to that hospital every day. I hate pretending to care about." Delaney's voice dropped. "I just want this to be over. It will be. Your mother knows what she's doing." Nolan stopped the recording. His hands shook as he reached for his coffee cup. The liquid had gone cold, but he barely tasted it. Delaney was having an affair with Rhett Carson, and somehow, Cynthia was involved in making Jesse's situation over. He forced himself to keep listening. "Sometimes I wonder if we should just." Delaney's voice was hesitant. "No, we stick to the plan. It has to look natural. But what if someone suspects?" "No one will. Your husband's too focused on work to notice anything." Wrong, Nolan thought. He noticed everything now. The recording continued with logistics when they could meet, where they could talk without being overheard. Normal affair planning, except for the references to Jesse's condition and Cynthia's involvement. Nolan saved the file and sat back in his chair. The pieces weren't complete yet, but a picture was forming. His wife was cheating with his son's former coach. Her mother was somehow helping make Jesse's illness over. And they all expected him to be too stupid or too busy to figure out. They were wrong about that. That evening at the hospital, Nolan watched everyone differently. Delaney sat beside Jesse's bed, reading him a story, her voice gentle and loving. But now Nolan heard the performance in it. Cynthia arrived with flowers and homemade soup, fussing over Jesse like a devoted grandmother. But her attention felt calculating. "How are you feeling tonight, sweetheart?" Cynthia asked Jesse. "Better. The new medicine Dr. Peterson prescribed is helping." "That's wonderful. You just keep taking everything exactly like they tell you to, okay?" Nolan watched his mother-in-law's face. There was something in her expression he'd never noticed before. Something that didn't match her words. "I'll make sure he does," Nolan said. Cynthia glanced at him. "Of course. We all want what's best for Jesse." We do. The words felt like a challenge. Cynthia held his gaze for a moment, then turned back to Jesse with renewed attention. Later, after Cynthia left and Delaney went to get dinner, Nolan sat alone with his son. Jesse was tired but alert, his color better than it had been in days. "Dad, are you okay? You seem different. Just tired, buddy. Work's been busy. Mom says you might get a promotion soon. Does she?" Nolan hadn't mentioned any promotion prospects to Delaney. "What else does she say?" Jesse shrugged. "Just that things might change soon. That we might move somewhere warmer when I get better." Move? This was the first Nolan had heard of any moving plans. "Where?" "I don't know. Maybe California. Mom says the weather would be better for my health." California, where Rhett Carson had mentioned having family, where a cheating wife might want to start fresh with her lover. "What do you think about that?" Nolan asked. "I guess it would be okay, but I like it here. My friends are here. And your work is here." "Yeah, my work is here." Nolan's work, his life, his roots in Spokane, all things that would need to be abandoned for Delaney's new plan to work, unless there was no Nolan to consider. The thought hit him like a physical blow. He'd been assuming this was about an affair, about ending a marriage. But what if it was bigger than that? What if the plan required him to be completely out of the picture? And what better way to destroy a man than to take away the thing he loved most? Jesse, Nolan's military training kicked in fully. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was a mission. Find the threat. Assess the danger. Neutralize the enemy. And the enemy was trying to hurt his son. Over the next week, Nolan watched Jesse's condition like a hawk monitoring prey. The boy had good days and bad days, which the doctor said was normal for his condition. But Nolan started tracking patterns. Jesse felt worse after Cynthia's visits. Not immediately, that would be too obvious. But within 6 to 12 hours, he developed nausea, fatigue, or mysterious symptoms that required additional medication. Nolan started a notebook, logging times, symptoms, and who had been present. He photographed Jesse's medication schedule and compared it to what the nurses actually administered. Small discrepancies began to emerge. "Dad, I don't feel good," Jesse said on Thursday morning after Cynthia had visited the night before. "What kind of not good?" "My stomach hurts, and I'm really tired." Nolan called for Tina Holloway. She checked Jesse's vitals and frowned at the readings. "His blood pressure's low. I'll page Dr. Peterson." While they waited, Nolan studied the medication chart. Jesse had received his normal evening doses, plus something Cynthia had brought, a natural supplement she'd convinced the nurses to administer. Tina, who approved the supplement Mrs. Ryland brought last night, Dr. Peterson signed off on it. "It's just vitamins and herbs. Natural immune support. Can I see the bottle?" Tina hesitated. "I'm not sure I can. I'm his father. I want to know what goes into my son's body." She brought the bottle from the medication room. The label listed ingredients Nolan didn't recognize, from a company he'd never heard of. But at the bottom, in small print, he found what he was looking for: a batch number and production date. He memorized both. Dr. Peterson arrived and examined Jesse. After 20 minutes of tests, he ordered 4 fluids and adjusted Jesse's medication schedule. "These episodes are concerning," the doctor told Nolan privately. "We might need to consider more aggressive treatment." "What kind of treatment?" "Stronger immunosuppressants. The kind that require longer hospital stays." "Longer hospital stays. More time for Cynthia to have access. More opportunities for natural supplements and mysterious episodes." "I'd like a second opinion," Nolan said. Dr. Peterson looked surprised. "Of course. That's your right. But Jesse's condition is deteriorating faster than we'd hoped." That afternoon, while Jesse slept, Nolan drove to a pharmacy across town. He showed the pharmacist a photo of the supplement bottle and asked about the ingredients. "Most of these are harmless," the pharmacist said. "But this one," he pointed to a name near the bottom of the list. "In large doses, it can cause nausea and fatigue. It's also a natural blood thinner." What would happen if someone gave it to a child with an autoimmune condition? Hypothetically, it could make their symptoms worse, make them appear sicker than they actually are. Nolan thanked the pharmacist and drove back to the hospital. In the parking garage, he called his old Army buddy Chase Morvan. "Chase, I need a favor. Can you run a background check on someone?" "Unofficial, very unofficial." "What's going on, Nolan?" I think someone's trying to hurt Jesse. Chase's tone changed immediately. Send me the details. I'll start tonight. That evening, Nolan confronted his first suspect. When Cynthia arrived for her usual visit, he was ready. Mrs. Ryland, can we talk privately? Of course, dear. How can I help? They stepped into the hallway. Nolan kept his voice low and controlled. I'd like you to stop bringing supplements for Jesse. Cynthia's expression shifted slightly. I don't understand. They're helping his immune system. His condition gets worse after he takes them. That's impossible. They're all natural. Natural doesn't mean safe. I want them stopped. For a moment, Cynthia's mask slipped. Nolan saw something cold and calculating in her eyes. You're under a lot of stress, Nolan. It's understandable that you'd look for someone to blame. I'm not blaming anyone. I'm protecting my son. For his own grandmother. Cynthia's voice took on a hurt tone. I've been trying to help. Everything I do is out of love. Then respect my wishes as his father. Cynthia stared at him for a long moment. Of course, if that's what you want. But Nolan saw the anger beneath her compliance. He'd just declared war, and she knew it. That night, he installed a small camera in Jesse's room. If someone was making his son sicker, he was going to catch them the act point 2 days later. Jesse had a severe allergic reaction. It happened at 3 in the morning while Nolan was sleeping in the chair beside his bed. Alarms started blaring as Jesse struggled to breathe. Nurses rushed in. Dr. Peterson arrived within minutes. They stabilized Jesse with epinephrine and steroids, but it was close. Too close. What could have caused this? Nolan demanded. We're running tests. Sometimes these reactions develop without warning. But Nolan had checked his hidden camera. At 2:30 a.m., a figure had entered Jesse's room. The lighting was poor, but he could make out enough to know it wasn't a nurse. That IT was Cynthia. She'd stayed for exactly 4 minutes, then left. 20 minutes later, Jesse had started having trouble breathing. Nolan waited until Jesse was stable, then pulled Dr. Peterson aside. I want Jesse transferred to another hospital. Mr. Reese, that's not necessary. We have his condition under control. No, someone here is making him worse. I want him moved. That's a serious accusation. Do you have evidence? Nolan considered showing the camera footage, but that would reveal he'd been recording without permission. He needed a different approach. I want a second opinion anyway. There's a children's hospital in Seattle with an experimental treatment program. I want Jesse evaluated for it. It was a lie, but a necessary one. Dr. Peterson couldn't argue with a father seeking the best care for his child. I'll need to make some calls. Make them. While the doctor arranged the transfer, Nolan called Delaney at work. Jesse had another episode. I'm having him transferred to Seattle for evaluation. What? You can't just move him without discussing it with me. I'm discussing it now. He's my son, too. Nolan, you're being irrational. Dr. Peterson knows his case better than anyone. Dr. Peterson isn't keeping him safe. There was a pause. What do you mean? I mean someone here is making him worse. And until I figure out who, Jesse stays away from this place. You're scaring me. You sound paranoid. Good. Maybe you should be scared. He hung up before she could respond. 2 hours later, Jesse was loaded into an ambulance for the drive to Seattle. Nolan rode with him, holding his son's hand as they left Spokane behind. Dad, what's happening? We're getting you better care, buddy. Somewhere safe. Jesse was too weak to ask more questions, but Nolan saw understanding in his eyes. His 10-year-old son wasn't stupid. He'd noticed things too. At the Seattle hospital, Nolan paid cash for a private room and registered Jesse under his legal guardianship. Delaney could visit, but she couldn't make medical decisions without his consent. The new doctors ran comprehensive tests. Within 48 hours, they had preliminary results. Your son's condition is serious, but not as advanced as his previous medical records indicated, Dr. Sarah Kim told Nolan. Some of his symptoms appear to be the result of medication interactions rather than disease progression. What kind of interactions? Several substances can mimic or worsen autoimmune symptoms. Without knowing exactly what he's been taking, it's hard to say. Nolan showed her photos of the supplements Cynthia had been bringing. Dr. Kim studied them carefully. Some of these could definitely cause problems. This one especially. She pointed to the same ingredient the pharmacist had highlighted. In combination with his prescribed medications, It could cause severe reactions. Could it cause an allergic response? In the right dosage, absolutely. Nolan felt something cold settle in his chest. What if someone was giving these to him deliberately? Dr. Kim's expression grew serious. Mr. Reese, are you suggesting someone was intentionally harming your son? I'm asking what would happen if they were. We'd be looking at attempted murder. While Jesse recovered in Seattle, Nolan drove back to Spokane with a new mission. His son was safe for now, but the people who tried to hurt him were still free. That was unacceptable that he started with Rhett Carson. Nolan found Rhett at the baseball field behind the elementary school, setting up equipment for practice. It was a warm Saturday morning, and kids would arrive soon for their weekly session. Rhett, the coach turned, surprised. Nolan, hey, how's Jesse doing? I heard he's in Seattle now. He's safe. Something in Nolan's tone made Rhett step back. That's good. I know this has been hard on your family. Has it? How would you know? Well, Delaney mentioned. I mean, we all care about Jesse. Do you? Nolan moved closer. Because I have recordings that suggest otherwise. Rhett's face went pale. I don't know what you mean. Sure you do. You and my wife have been planning Jesse's future. Or should I say, his lack of one. You're crazy. I would never hurt Jesse. No, you're just sleeping with his mother and waiting for him to die so you can start fresh together. Rhett looked around frantically, probably hoping other parents would arrive early. But they were alone on the field. Nolan, listen to me. It's not what you think. What is it then? Explain it to me. I care about Delaney. But I would never. Jesse is a good kid. A good kid who's in your way. No, that's not true. Nolan grabbed Rhett by the front of his shirt and pulled him close. His voice dropped to a whisper. I know what you and Delaney have been planning. I know about Cynthia's supplements. I know about the allergic reaction. And I know you think I'm too stupid to figure out. You're wrong. We never wanted to hurt Jesse. You just wanted him gone. Rhett's silence was answer enough. Nolan released him with enough force to send him stumbling backward. Stay away from my family. All of them. If I see you near Jesse or Delaney again, we'll finish this conversation differently. He left Rhett standing alone on the baseball field and drove to his next target. Aubrey Carson answered her front door in gardening gloves, soil smudged on her jeans. She was an attractive woman in her mid-30s with kind eyes and an honest face. The kind of woman who deserved better than a cheating husband. Mrs. Carson, I'm Nolan Reese. We met at the school fundraiser last year. Of course. How's Jesse? I heard he's been in the hospital. He's better now. Can we talk? It's about your husband. Aubrey's expression changed. She'd suspected something, Nolan realized. Maybe for a while. Come in. Her living room was comfortable and neat, with family photos showing happier times. Aubrey offered coffee, but Nolan declined. Mrs. Carson, I'm going to be direct. Your husband is having an affair with my wife. She sat down heavily in an armchair. I know. You know, I've suspected for months. Different cologne. Late meetings that didn't match his schedule. Phone calls he wouldn't take in front of me. She looked up at Nolan. But knowing and proving are different things. I can prove it. Nolan played her selected portions of his recordings. Aubrey listened with growing anger, her hands clenched in her lap. That bastard, she whispered. How could he? With your son so sick, there's more. Nolan explained his suspicions about Cynthia and the supplements. I think they wanted Jesse to die, so they could be together without complications. Aubrey's face went white. Oh my God, you think I tried to kill him? I think they tried to help his illness along. But Rhett loves kids. He coaches them. She trailed off, reality setting in. What do you need from me? Any evidence you have of the affair. Phone records, credit card statements, anything that proves they've been together. I could do better than that. Aubrey left the room and returned with a small recording device. I've been documenting his lies for divorce proceedings. But last week, I recorded something that might interest you. She played the recording. Rhett's voice came through clearly. It's almost over, baby. Once Jesse's gone, Nolan will be destroyed. You can comfort him for a while, then leave when he's not thinking straight. Take the life insurance money and meet me in San Diego. Delaney's voice responded. What if he suspects something? He won't. Your mother's been careful. It'll look like natural progression of his disease. I just wish it would happen faster. I hate pretending to care. Soon. Your mother says his immune system is weakening. The next reaction should finish it. Aubrey stopped the recording. Both she and Nolan sat in silence for a moment. They were planning to murder your son. Aubrey said quietly, "Yes. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to destroy them." Meanwhile, Chase Morvan had been busy with his background research. When Nolan called that evening, Chase had disturbing news. Your mother-in-law has a history. 18 years ago, her first grandchild died unexpectedly. 2-year-old boy named Tommy. Officially ruled SIDS, but there were questions. What kind of questions? The kid had been healthy. No risk factors. But Cynthia had been babysitting him regularly in the weeks before his death. Neighbors reported that she seemed more upset about the family drama than the child's death. Family drama. Tommy's parents were getting divorced. Nasty custody battle. Tommy's death meant no more child support. No more custody issues. Very convenient for Cynthia's daughter. Nolan felt sick. Was she investigated? Briefly. But the evidence was circumstantial, and the family didn't want to pursue it. They were grieving and wanted to move on. Is the daughter still alive? Yeah. Lives in Oregon now. Remarried. I found a social media post from 2 years ago where she mentions having nightmares about her son's death and wondering if she should have asked more questions. Send me her contact information. Nolan, what are you planning? Justice. Nolan spent the next 2 days preparing his attack. He uploaded all his evidence to multiple cloud accounts and made copies on several drives. He organized the timeline of Jesse's symptoms, matched them to Cynthia's visits, and documented every suspicious incident. Then he reached out to Kaya Voss. Kaya was a freelance investigative podcaster who specialized in family crimes. Her show, Hidden Truths, had exposed several cases of domestic abuse and child endangerment that local authorities had missed. She was young, hungry, and thorough. Mr. Reese, I appreciate you reaching out, but I need to understand what you're alleging. I'm alleging that my mother-in-law attempted to murder my son with the help of my wife and her lover. There was a pause. That's a serious accusation. What evidence do you have? Nolan sent her a carefully edited package. Audio recordings that prove the affair and conspiracy, medical records showing Jesse's symptom patterns, photos of the suspicious supplements, and Chase's research on Cynthia's history. Holy shit, Kaya said after reviewing everything. This is huge. But why come to me? Why not go straight to the police? Because I want the story told right. I want people to understand what they tried to do before lawyers start spinning narratives. And you're sure about all this? Your wife really participated in a plan to kill your son. Listen to the recordings again. Tell me what you think. Kaya called back an hour later. I'll take the story, but I need to verify everything independently. And I'll need to contact the other parties for comment. Do whatever you need to do. But don't warn them it's coming. I'm a journalist, Mr. Reese. I follow ethical guidelines. These people tried to murder a 10-year-old boy. Keep your ethics, but don't let them prepare a defense. Kaya's first episode went live on a Tuesday morning. She titled it The Loving Grandmother, a Spokane Family's Dark Secret. Within hours, it had thousands of downloads. By evening, local news stations were picking up the story. By the next morning, it was trending on social media. The story was devastating. Kaya had independently verified most of Nolan's evidence and interviewed the mother of Cynthia's first grandchild, who confirmed her suspicions about Tommy's death. She'd also spoken to Tina Holloway, the hospital nurse, who admitted she'd been uncomfortable with Cynthia's behavior but hadn't known what to do about it. Nolan listened to the podcast from his hotel room in Seattle, where he was staying near Jesse's hospital. His son was improving rapidly without the supplements and mysterious medication interactions. His phone started ringing immediately. Reporters, police, family members, friends. He ignored them all except one call from Detective Maria Santos of the Spokane Police Department. Mr. Reese, we need to talk. I'm listening. We've opened an investigation based on the podcast allegations. We'll need your full cooperation. You'll have it. We also need to know where your son is. He's been reported missing by his mother. He's not missing. He's in protective custody with me at Seattle Children's Hospital. She's filed for emergency custody, claiming you kidnapped him. Nolan's jaw tightened. Let her try. I have legal guardianship, and I have evidence that she was part of a conspiracy to harm him. That's what we need to discuss. Can you come to Spokane? I'll be there tomorrow. The second podcast episode dropped as Nolan drove back to Spokane. This one included Aubrey Carson's recording of Rhett and Delaney discussing Jesse's expected death and their plans afterward. The response was explosive. Local news crews camped outside Delaney's workplace and Cynthia's house. Social media exploded with outrage and support for Jesse. Someone started a GoFundMe for his medical expenses that raised $50,000 in the first day. CPS, media, and local authorities swarmed Delaney and Cynthia. They denied everything, but the pressure was building fast. Cynthia panicked first. Within 24 hours of the podcast going viral, she packed a bag and tried to flee to Idaho. She was arrested at the state border for obstruction of a child endangerment investigation. Nolan arrived at the police station to find protesters outside, some supporting him and others claiming the allegations were false. He ignored them all and went inside to meet Detective Santos. Mr. Reese, before we start, I want you to know that we've arrested Cynthia Ryland at the Idaho border. Good. We've also issued a warrant for your wife and Rhett Carson. Where are they? Still in the area. We expect to have them in custody within hours. Over the next 4 hours, Nolan provided detailed testimony about everything he discovered. He turned over all his evidence, including the original recordings and photographs. He explained his decision to move Jesse to Seattle and his reasons for going public with the story. Why didn't you come to us first? Detective Santos asked. Because I needed proof that would stick, and I needed public attention to make sure this didn't get swept under the rug. You don't trust the system? I trust evidence. I trust documentation. I trust public pressure. I don't trust people to do the right thing just because it's right. When the interview was finished, Nolan drove to the hospital where it all started. Room 314 was empty now, prepared for the next patient. Tina Holloway was working the evening shift. Mr. Reese, I heard about everything. I'm so sorry I didn't speak up sooner. You spoke up when it mattered. How's Jesse? Better. Much better. He'll be coming home soon. I'm glad. He's a special boy. Yeah, he is. That evening, Nolan watched the local news coverage from his hotel room. The story had exploded beyond Spokane. National news outlets were picking it up. Child advocacy groups were using it to discuss warning signs of abuse. Medical professionals were debating hospital security protocols. His phone buzzed with a text from Chase. Saw the news. How are you holding up? Nolan replied, fine. Almost over. But it wasn't over. The real battle was just beginning. 6 months later, Nolan sat in the gallery of Spokane County Superior Court, watching his wife's defense attorney try to convince a jury that everything had been a misunderstanding. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard a lot of inflammatory accusations, Attorney Patricia Weston said. But at the heart of this case is a grieving mother whose words were taken out of context during the most stressful period of her life. Nolan kept his expression neutral. Delaney sat at the defense table in a conservative blue dress, looking like the perfect mother wrongly accused. Her hair was styled differently, softer. Her makeup was subtle, everything calculated to generate sympathy. Mrs. Reese never harmed her son, Weston continued. The recordings you've heard represent private conversations between a desperate woman and her lover. Yes, she made poor choices. Yes, she had an affair. But that doesn't make her a murderer. The prosecutor, District Attorney James Mitchell, had a different story to tell. This isn't about a mother's grief, he said when his turn came. This is about greed, selfishness, and the calculated abuse of a sick child. The evidence will show that Delaney Reese conspired with her mother and her lover to hasten her son's death for financial gain. Jesse was 11 now, stronger and healthier than he'd been in over a year. His autoimmune condition was manageable with proper treatment and without the interference of Cynthia's supplements. He sat beside Nolan, old enough to understand what was happening but young enough to need his father's steady presence. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Nolan testified first, walking the jury through his discovery of the affair, the suspicious recordings, and Jesse's pattern of illness following Cynthia's visits. Mr. Reese, Defense Attorney Weston said during cross-examination, isn't it true that you were under tremendous stress during your son's illness? Yes. Isn't it possible that stress affected your judgment? Made you suspicious of innocent actions? No. You secretly recorded your own wife. You installed hidden cameras. You removed your son from his medical team without their approval. These aren't the actions of a rational person. These are the actions of a father protecting his son from his own mother, from anyone who would hurt him. Weston tried to paint Nolan as paranoid and controlling, but the evidence was too strong. The recordings spoke for themselves. The medical testimony confirmed that Jesse's condition had improved dramatically once he was removed from Cynthia's influence, the doctor. Kim from Seattle Children's Hospital testified about the supplements and their effects. In my professional opinion, these substances were deliberately chosen to worsen the child's condition while appearing to help it. This level of knowledge suggests premeditation. Tina Holloway, the nurse, described Cynthia's behavior at the hospital. She was always very focused on Jesse's medication schedule. She asked detailed questions about dosages and timing. At the time, I thought she was just a concerned grandmother. Now I realize she was gathering information. The most damaging testimony came from Aubrey Carson, who played her recording of Rhett and Delaney planning Jesse's death and their subsequent life together. She said she hated pretending to care. Aubrey told the jury. These were her own words about her dying son. When Delaney took the stand in her own defense, she tried to explain away the recordings. I was angry and frustrated. My son was dying, my marriage was falling apart, and I was making poor decisions. But I never wanted to hurt Jesse. Then what did you mean when you said it'll be over soon? Prosecutor Mitchell asked. I meant his suffering would be over. That he'd either get better or find peace. And when you laughed and said as long as no one finds out, I was talking about the affair. I didn't want Nolan to discover that Rhett and I were involved. What about your comment that you wished Jesse had died sooner, so you could move on with Rhett? Delaney's composure cracked. I never said that. We have a recording, Mrs. Reese. I was upset. People say things they don't mean when they're upset. Do they plan their son's death when they're upset? I never planned anything. But the jury had heard the recordings. They'd seen the evidence. They'd watched Jesse testify via video about feeling sicker after his grandmother's visits and overhearing conversations about getting rid of problems. The most powerful moment came when Jesse spoke directly to the camera. I knew something was wrong. Grandma Cynthia was always nice to me, but I felt worse after she visited. And I heard Mom talking to Rhett about me being a problem. I didn't understand then, but I understand now. What do you understand now, Jesse? The prosecutor asked gently. That some people pretend to love you when they really want you gone. The prosecution's case culminated with the revelation of Nolan's complete evidence collection. Over 6 months, he documented every interaction, every suspicious incident, every piece of the conspiracy. Mr. Reese didn't just record conversations. D.A. Mitchell told the jury. He built an airtight case. He tracked medication schedules, photographed suspicious supplements, documented symptoms, and cross-referenced everything with hospital visits. The evidence table was covered with binders, photographs, and medical records. Audio equipment played the clearest recordings. Charts showed the correlation between Cynthia's visits and Jesse's declining health. This is the work of a man who knew his son was in danger and was determined to prove it. Mitchell continued. This is the work of a father who refused to let his child be murdered. Defense attorney Weston made one last attempt to discredit the evidence. Ladies and gentlemen, this entire case is built on secretly recorded conversations and the paranoid obsessions of a controlling husband. Mrs. Reese made mistakes. She had an affair. She said hurtful things. But that doesn't make her a murderer. But the jury had heard enough. After deliberating for 8 hours over 2 days, they returned their verdict. On the charge of conspiracy to commit child endangerment, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of attempted murder in the second degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of insurance fraud conspiracy, we find the defendant guilty. Delaney collapsed in her chair. Her attorney immediately began planning appeals, but the verdict was solid. The evidence was overwhelming. Cynthia had already pled guilty to child endangerment and attempted poisoning in exchange for a reduced sentence. She'd been sentenced to 15 years in prison and mandatory psychiatric evaluation. Rhett Carson had taken a plea deal, testifying against Delaney in exchange for a lighter sentence on conspiracy charges. He'd received 8 years and would be banned from working with children upon release. But Delaney had chosen a fight, convinced she could charm her way out of consequences. It had backfired spectacularly at his sentencing. Nolan sat in the front row with Jesse. The courtroom was packed with reporters, supporters, and curious onlookers. The case had become a symbol of parental vigilance and justice for endangered children. Judge Rebecca Morrison had reviewed all the evidence and testimony. Her expression was stern as she addressed Delaney. "Mrs. Reese, I've presided over many difficult cases in my career, but this one stands out for its calculated cruelty. You participated in a conspiracy to murder your own child for financial gain. You showed no remorse, only self-pity. You endangered an innocent boy who trusted you to protect him." Delaney stood silent, her legal team having advised her to show contrition. But her face revealed no genuine remorse, only anger at being caught. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit child endangerment, I sentence you to 5 years in state prison. On the charge of attempted murder in the second degree, I sentence you to 15 years in state prison, to run consecutively. On the charge of insurance fraud conspiracy, I sentence you to 5 years in state prison, to run concurrently. Total sentence, 20 years in state prison, with possibility of parole after 15 years. The courtroom erupted. Delaney's supporters gasped. Jesse squeezed Nolan's hand. Reporters scribbled frantically. Judge Morrison banged her gavel for order. "Furthermore, I'm issuing a permanent restraining order prohibiting Mrs. Reese from any contact with a minor child, Jesse Reese. This includes letters, phone calls, third-party messages, or any other form of communication." Delaney finally broke. "He's my son," she screamed as bailiffs approached. "You can't keep me from my son. You forfeited that right when you tried to kill him." Judge Morrison replied coldly. Delaney was led away in handcuffs. She looked back at Nolan with pure hatred. He met her gaze without flinching. There was no forgiveness in his eyes, no mercy, no regret. She had chosen her path. Now she would walk it alone. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Nolan and Jesse. Nolan made a brief statement. "Justice has been served. My son is safe. That's all that matters. Mr. Reese, do you have any message for other parents in similar situations? Trust your instincts. Document everything. Never assume someone won't hurt a child just because they claim to love them. Will you ever forgive your wife?" Nolan's expression hardened. Some things are unforgivable. 1 year later, Nolan stood in the garage behind his house, teaching Jesse how to adjust the carburetor on a 1970 Honda motorcycle. The boy's hands were steady now, his color healthy, his autoimmune condition well-controlled with proper medication and no interference. "Like this, Dad?" Jesse asked, turning the screw carefully. "Perfect. You're a natural." The garage was part of Nolan's new business. After the trial, he'd used some of the GoFundMe money and his savings to open a motorcycle repair shop. He specialized in vintage bikes, the kind that required patience and skill to restore. It was honest work. Peaceful work. Work that let him be home when Jesse got out of school and available for every doctor's appointment, every baseball game, every moment that mattered. "Dad, yeah. Are you happier now?" Nolan considered the question. Happiness felt like the wrong word. He wasn't happy that his wife had tried to murder their son. He wasn't happy that Jesse had suffered. He wasn't happy that he'd learned to distrust the people who should have been most trustworthy. But he was satisfied. Justice had been served. His son was safe. The people who'd threatened them were neutralized. "I'm content," he said finally. "We're safe. We're together. That's enough." Jesse nodded, understanding more than most 11-year-olds should have to understand. "I'm glad you figured it out," Jesse said quietly. "I'm glad you saved me. I'll always save you. That's what fathers do." Above Nolan's workbench hung a simple wooden sign he'd made after the trial. It contained 2 sentences that had become his philosophy. Trust is earned. Forgiveness is optional. Some lessons, once learned, could never be unlearned. Some betrayals cut too deep to heal. Some people revealed their true nature in ways that made redemption impossible. Nolan had accepted all of that. He'd built a new life on the foundation of that acceptance. A life where trust was earned through actions, not words. Where safety came from vigilance, not hope. Where love was proven through protection, not promises. That IT wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was the life Jesse deserved. And that was enough. Outside, Spokane's spring air carried the promise of renewal. But inside the garage, surrounded by the tools of his trade and the quiet satisfaction of honest work, Nolan Reese had found something more valuable than forgiveness, that he'd found peace.